Two people in the Cape Town studio with me who are all to do with art. Now, I bought a piece of art the other day because I liked it. I like bright colours and it really appealed to me. But what's it worth? Nobody really knows. It's all to do with perception, I suppose. And let's get straight into that now, and how one can sort of cut through all that rubbish and make some money out of art. In the studio with me is Stefan Hunt from Sanlam and also George Herman from Citadel. Stefan, I must start with you first of all. I was with your CEO, Jan van Sale, sitting in his office, and I looked up to my right and there was a picture that looked actually rather pretty, and he said, yeah, it's an Irma Stern, it's worth 15 million rand. I thought, okay, and I felt slightly cold. I felt a little bit intimidated. One shouldn't be intimidated by art though, of course.
No, I don't think so. I think you should actually enjoy it, and I suppose enjoyment comes in very different forms. As you said, you bought yours because it was beautiful colours and you liked it, and what was it worth? What you paid for it.
Yes, exactly.
Much like any asset or share.
And I make a confession now, George. One of the reasons I bought it was not just because I thought it was a beautiful piece of art, which I still think it is, but the person that painted it is in advanced years. I mean, she's in her 90s and she's going to die soon. I mean, it's not. I don't feel as though I'm being too brutal by saying that, and therefore the supply has been cut off.
So you must have been an option trader. There's some time decay happening.
No. Years ago, yes.
Two things. Firstly, your timing's probably good. I think looking at what's been happening in the Chinese market, the equity markets, the art market overall, it seems like we're in for a pretty decent period in the next short while. So good timing on that, well done. And secondly, from the data, we also see that nearly 50% of all transactions in art, and that's at auction, takes place at less than 10,000 rand. So I absolutely agree with you that people shouldn't be intimidated by art and should embrace it.
The Citadel Art Price Index, the CAPI, as you call it now, tell us about it and how it measures South African art.
Well, I'm not going to go into the technical detail. It's a complex calculation method, but fact of the matter is it tries over the last 5 years to represent all the artwork that traded at auction and to establish an index to catch the trends of art prices during that period. So we can't value individual pieces, that's what Stefan and them does, but what we do is to try and get a feeling for the trend of art prices, and it seems to be working well. It's up about 4.5% for this year thus far, just over 10.5% for the last 12 months. So it feels like there's some good underlying momentum in the art market right now.
My co-host who's left, Bronwyn Nielsen, would have a go at me if I didn't ask about the capitalism involved here. Stefan, you've got an incredible art collection just up the road here at Sanlam headquarters. How much has it gone up, would you suppose, since it was first started in the 1960s?
I'm very bad at calculating things, but it's been significant. I think, you know, if you looked at the books, and don't even talk about the 1960s, I think you've really got to compare. Obviously, if you wanted to do a calculation that you have to include inflation and all that. But just purely in terms of the last 10, 15 years, you've seen an art collection that was valued at, let's say, book value, what they paid for it, at about 6-7 million rand, and now we're trying to insure it for 158 million rand. So it gives you a pretty good idea of the huge jump that this art market has seen, particularly in South Africa.
Particularly with really fine artists. I went to the Irma Stern Museum for the first time the other day, and I paid 10 rand to get in, and I spent 2 hours there, and I just sat down for about 45 minutes just staring at this one wall because it was overwhelmingly beautiful.
Yes, they have a remarkable collection, and it's a remarkable museum that very few people actually know about still. And I think that's because of our lack of public education in terms of art as such. So what one does see is obviously, in a sense, that large prices make news, and of course the name Irma Stern jumps up all the time, or Maggie Loebsch or Pionier. But I think if you look at something like that index, for instance, you'll see that generally the whole market has grown dramatically well from sort of 1997 onwards. And I think people have realized that we have an exceptional quality of work in this country. It is rare, and as one will see, and as auctions come and go, and that's probably the best public forum to get some sense of what's happening. that these works are becoming rarer and rarer, and the good quality ones obviously become unique pieces, and that's why they achieve such record prices, and in many instances justifiably so.
As those ones become rarer and rarer, of course, and when there's money involved, then of course people come into the market, and George, you'll probably recognise the fact that there is now an excess of supply. There are artists everywhere. I mean, when I bought this particular piece by Molly Townsend a couple of weeks ago, and someone said, well, it's a nice piece and everything, but there is so much art just like that. Lots and lots of supply, so one has to be careful.
I don't think there's an oversupply right now because, I mean, that market's growing. If you have investment returns like that, then obviously it will attract a lot of work, which is a great thing because the industry needs to grow and to feed itself. But what you do find is that some of the works that Stefan refers to, for instance, the Stearns, you know, suddenly now there's a deluge of supply of specifically a name like that, and then suddenly you don't see the record prices.
So what you're saying is when a certain price is achieved, then suddenly someone finds one that they think, hello, 10 million, I can't ignore
Exactly.
that.
The contemporary market, we need a lot of supply in that market. It feeds that whole industry. It's fantastic.
Stefan, from your point of view, are you still adding to the collection? Are you doing it because it's just part of the DNA at Sanlam, or are you doing it for an investment purpose?
I think we're adding to the collection perhaps a lot more circumspectly than before. Obviously the collection has an established history, so we're not necessarily looking in that part of the market which seems now to be quite hot in terms of prices and so on and so forth. So we're not buying those Irma Stearns and Maggie Lopeses. They're represented in the collection already. So in that sense, we're looking at those gaps in the historical record that we have and that we'd like to represent in the collection, and finding, how could you say, almost bargains in those areas.
Well, let's have a look at bargains now, because I want to know who I should be looking at. Up and coming young artists, or artists that are about to die, preferably, so that their supply gets cut off. Now, I'm being facetious. But what about black artists? What about black art in Africa and South Africa? There must be up and coming people that we really should be watching.
I think that generally, whether the artist is black or not is becoming less and less relevant, especially in the contemporary area. And I think you can read, it's very difficult to compare the contemporary work that's being produced with what you'd see on the Stefan Wels or Strauss auction. They do have some contemporary pieces, and it's growing in terms of the number of items that come on that auction. But it's a very different scene entirely. I think if you went to an exhibition now in Venice and you looked at what gets produced on the Venice Biennial, you wouldn't sort of say that this is art necessarily, because very few of the items actually represent anything that you'd see in a grand old collection at all. So I think they're very different parts of this art market that one can get involved in.
George, you at Citadel, sorry to interrupt, you at Citadel, you obviously got this price index, this art price index, for a reason. Do you advise some of your really high net worth individual clients to invest in art? What do you say to these clients?
We don't specifically push people into art. We had to find some way of identifying the trends so that most of our clients who already own art, that we could provide them with some advice. Right now, for instance, the South African equity market could be considered quite expensive. So you would say to your clients that they should diversify. And when people diversify, they often start looking at alternative asset classes. So you've already got property, private equity, you've got some hedge funds. So now the newer forms of alternative investments, anything from art, wine, racehorses, racing cars, yachts, aeroplanes, diamonds, other collectibles, all coming to the fray. And that client already has a decent diversified portfolio, so he starts buying stuff that he really loves, that he has a taste for, that he has a feel for. And you can't argue that if he sticks to that plan over a long period of time, it does make sense to be in some of those alternative classes.
And you can't argue that what you pay for a picture is exactly what it's worth, and what you sell it for is exactly what it's worth. And if you watch a film called The Untouchables, that French film, have you seen that, where his first picture sells for 11,000 euros, it's because someone told him it was worth 11,000 euros. George, Stefan, thank you very much for your time this evening. That's Stefan Hunt from Sanlam.